All right, Rajni, thank you so much for joining me in this conversation. It's a delight to have you.
Well, it's a pleasure and an honor to be here.
Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, the conversation, the inquiry, I think we are blessed to be in this inquiry, I feel, and I'm very blessed to be in this inquiry with you. So, just to introduce this conversation, Rajni, I mean, you've been one of the most, not only an amazing historian, but a very juicy storyteller. We love listening to you. Like, we really love it. And it feels as if a conversation with you is worth like reading many, 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 many books. So we are like, Rajni hai, Rajni se baat kar lete hain. Because she's been a witness to so much. She's been a witness and you kind of process so much. And so when we were coming for a conversation, I was wondering which is a conversation worth having that a lot of people would also want to listen into. So which could be that conversation, and that's when the whole conversation around this one came up, saying what are five moments in independent India's history that are most significant? What are the five key moments in independent India's history that we definitely must reflect on, learn from, know, influence us today? So without further ado, I'm going to invite you to get going into the five moments, and let's. I don't want to rank order them, otherwise it'd be fun to do a countdown. Number five, number four, number three, but let's not do that. Let's get
No,
right
no.
in. And
In any case, I'm going to go chronologically, so
okay,
it's not a hierarchy of importance or anything.
okay, sure, Rani. So let's
Yeah.
begin. We've just got independence. What happens first? What's the
So, in
first big
fact,
thing?
yeah, I think the first big event for me, big meaning, see, I am looking at this your request in two ways. One is those moments which reflected or which manifested our aspirational self and or the challenges to that aspirational self.
Okay, okay,
Okay, so for me that first then moment, and I'm, as I said, this is not a hierarchy of importance, it is literally going chronologically, is the assassination of Mahatma Gandhi. Because though I know that these days there is a fashion sorry, to present it as something that was wrapped up in the nitty gritty of, oh, he wanted to give away money to Pakistan, he was responsible for Pakistan, and therefore this person had this uncontrollable rage against him. Actually, these are all pretty rather, almost superficial issues. They are the bahanas.
Mhm.
The core issue is those who, and by the way, Godse only is the man who pulled the trigger. There was no shortage of people who felt that sentiment. I don't know how many people are aware that in that day and age, when you had to take the trouble, there was no social media, right? There was not even phones very easily available. Even landlines were very rare. You had, if you wanted to send somebody a hate message, you had to put it on paper, then you had to find a stamp, go to a post box. In that day and age when so much effort was involved, Gandhi got bags full of hate mail. And what is the distinguishing feature? I think the distinguishing feature is not actually even this, whether we should be a Hindu nation or a mixed religion nation is also a relatively lower order issue. I think the core issue is what is it to be a nation?
What is it to be a nation? Is at
Nation.
stake. Okay.
Uh-huh. And in that sense, Gandhi ji and Thakur, Rabindranath Thakur, they are, in that sense, even in their own lifetime, they maybe can't, you could consider them outliers, because they are positing a civilizational understanding of what matters, what is worth pursuing, what makes life richer, more meaningful, more beautiful, more multidimensional for all of us. And therefore, both of them reject nationalism as a competitive phenomenon. I, Ashish Nandi is the person you need to listen to on this theme in great detail. It is through Ashish Nandi that I have learned to distinguish between patriotism and nationalism. Patriotism is this feeling कि ये मेरा देश है. I have a sense of being here, a belonging here, a sense of joy about just literally, when we say is mitti ki khushboo,
हम्म.
वो आपकी इवन जिस देश में धरती, वो क्या,
जिस देश में
मेरे
गंगा
देश की धरती
अच्छा, मेरे
सोना,
देश की
उगले उगले हीरे मोती. I even there, so it's very significant. I'm going to refer to that film, Upkar. I think it's 62 or 63. It is still that echo of patriotism rather than nationalism. For patriotism, you don't have to compare yourself or locate yourself in relation to some other who you have decided is perpetually trying to make you look small, or is at odds with you, or is trying to threaten you. uh, and so basically the assassination of Gandhi is a war. It is a hit from that viewpoint, which believes that Gandhi's version, Gandhi's active disregard, deliberate disregard for nation in this competitive sense is a threat, and that the new India will then become a weak and an effeminate. It's very interesting that the womanliness is equated with weakness, which we know to be a complete travesty.
And yet there is a Bharat Mata visualization that is kind of the popular imagery, right? That the
which
same
which
group.
which we need to go to some semiotic experts to understand
हाँ,
कि उसकी क्या dynamic है.
sure.
Because I mean, we can go into that a little bit. What I've understood, I can share with you. So I'm saying that is the first, I think,
Okay.
and it is a double-edged happening. See, on the one hand, at that time, I mean, it's a body blow. It's a body blow at one level, right? And to everyone. If you see the recent Ahimsa conversation with Professor Muhammad Yunus, I asked him if he has any recollection of Gandhi, and he said no, he was too young. But he does remember that there was only one radio in the family, and he has never forgotten the image of his father standing beside the radio as the news of Gandhi's killing came and sobbing.
Wow.
And he says, my father was a staunch Muslim leaguer who had fought Gandhi, who had disagreed and opposed Gandhi because he wanted Pakistan. He wanted that it should be two nations. And this man, who had otherwise been Gandhi's opponent, is standing there and sobbing.
Wow.
So we are today not able to, fully appreciate what a cataclysmic event that was. Let me give you one last image, which will, I hope, convey what was happening to us as a people. An American journalist traveled on the train that carried Gandhiji's ashes to Allahabad, because one urn of the ashes was to be immersed at Triveni with full, ritual honors. So a special train was assigned, and people were given a chance to pay honor, to have darshan in a sense. See, हम लोगों के यहाँ ये जो दर्शन की परंपरा है, our need to be in the presence of. Darshan here is not seeing, okay, I am seeing you on the screen just now. Darshan is to be in the presence of that which connects us to our larger self, takes us out of our this tiny, small ego self. So this American journalist, his name is, I'll just give it to you, Sheen. I can't remember the first name just now. He says, okay, I knew that at every station where it stops, people will come in thousands to file past the compartment where the urn was sitting. It was lying, with decorated by flowers and all. He says, in the fields on the way where the train passed, people lined up besides the track. Ordinary people, peasants. So that's what I mean when I say it was felt as a body blow. And then we thought that the price has been paid, and my generation, see, I'm born 10 years after independence, 11 years after 47. I'm born in 58. So my generation grew up thinking this whole matter is settled. Of course, this is the only way that we should be a nation that is a space for everyone who feels part of it, who's just born here by accident, like me, by accident of birth. Okay. So that's the first one. You want to stop me in any way here with any detail on this?
No, I had lots of questions, Rajni, but I was wondering maybe we cycle through the five and then
Okay.
maybe look at connections and trends and
Yeah,
how
yeah.
one influenced the other.
Sure,
That would
sure.
be nice.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, I should also maybe add a qualifying note that this is an utterly and completely subjective.
Yes,
You have
yes,
asked me
absolutely.
for
Yes,
my.
yes.
I don't know if I sat down in some very clinical way. I don't know what I would come up with, but maybe
So
that's
we
not what you're
wanted
looking
your,
for.
I wanted to really know you and
Yeah.
your your views. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So the next, I would say, for me is the JP movement, which is, for me, the JP movement is, you can say, from about 72, 73, right up till the emergency. And it is the renewal of the idea that that free India is not just to be free of the British, but it is to be a complete transformation of social and economic relations so that there will be genuine justice from the top to the bottom, or rather from the bottom to the top. And therefore, JP is using the word total revolution, Sampurna Kranti. And yet, very plausibly and very coherently, there is, I have talked to dozens of people who were part of that movement. I was too young. I was also not in India at that time. I was a teenager and we were not living. My father was on an assignment abroad. But I was a working journalist by the time the 10 years anniversary of the JP movement came around. So I did extensive interviews at that time. And then, of course, subsequently, I've been in touch with many people. Many of them are now featuring in Ahimsa conversations. So while the word revolution was used, it was never meant in the sense of, a complete sweeping away of the existing power by whatever means possible and forcibly or violently replacing it with some new just order. These are people who had seen what the Russian and Chinese revolution had brought. They had no illusions. Okay, the excesses of Stalin and Lenin and then later even the post-Stalinist Soviet regime were a well-documented reality. The enormous cost of the Cultural Revolution in China was a well-known fact. So when JP used the word Sampurna Kranti, he was using it along with a slogan which still reverberates today. I have to say it in Hindi first. Hamla chahe jaisa hoga, haath hamara nahi uthega. And it was, by and large, it was carried out. I'm not saying there would have been zero incidents. In a thing of that scale, it's very difficult to get everyone to own and to wholly live an ideal like that. But by and large, it was. Of course, the flip side of the story is that Indira Gandhi did use this as the justification to argue that JP was a threat to national security, that his leadership was going to create a kind of situation of chaos, and that is why the emergency was required. And I know that today it is fashionable to be cynical about the JP movement because, there's an objective basis for it, because some of the people who were young, hopeful idealists who emerged through that movement went on to become some of India's, one more generation of very corrupt and manipulative political leaders. So that I'm not saying we should overlook that, but that is not the only story. And that urge rose. Okay, why? Because why is it significant? Because it showed the next level of the struggle to realize the dream that was inherent in the freedom struggle but was unfulfilled. So that is the second. The third for me is the Narmada Bachao Andolan, and here I am suggesting that we take the Narmada Bachao Andolan as a metaphor and as a literal entity, because it had actually global reverberations. Okay. Many things were happening at that time. I don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that Narmada Bachao Andolan, if it in fact it had been alone, it would have been a flash in the pan, but it wasn't. It gathered that much momentum because it was part of an existing groundswell. What was this groundswell saying? Okay, what we have been told is development is actually turning out to be more destruction than development. And this so-called development is only possible if some of us are continuously paying the price for it. And therefore, the slogan emerged, Hame Vinash nahi, Vikash chahiye. We want not destruction, but genuine development. And this is why I think it is 1989, we can check this later, in 1989 September, tens of thousands of people gathered at a small town, Kasba really, of Madhya Pradesh called Harsood, for a rally that became a historical event. And actually it's also very historic because some of the most significant people of that period were on the stage, including, for example, Shankar Gohan Yogi, the great trade union leader of the coal mine workers of Delhi Rajara. And so that's why I'm saying the whole fact of the Narmada Bachao Andolan, and then the fact that it didn't give up. It consistently stayed with the struggle, Baba Amte joining in. And why is it significant to the country as a whole? Because till then, very well-educated, well-meaning, well-intentioned people had no idea what human cost their comforts were built upon. We all knew to think of, we were told and we were taught to think of Bhakra Nangal as a temple of modern India. But we were never told what was the cost. Acha, chalo, ecological cost, to, okay, you can say, but you can only know it later on, downstream. You cannot anticipate it. Maybe you could argue that, because let's face it, in the mid-80s, environment was hardly an issue. Though Indira Gandhi had raised the issue and made her famous statement, I think in, what was it, early 80s? But the human cost was not known to us because nobody had bothered to highlight it. Nobody had, there had been small struggles. There had been actually very significant struggles, but nothing had captured the public imagination the way that Narmada Bachao Andolan managed to do. And I think a great part of this was the kind of moral fiber, moral presence that both Medha and Baba Amte brought to the movement. See, I traveled with Medha very often in those days, and I can tell you it was so moving. Of course, there were people who would come and say, hey, madam, why you are opposed to the development of India? In train journeys, bus journeys. There were these people. I'm not saying they were not there. But they were always less in number and even in intensity than those who just wanted to come and shake her hand. Or who, teenagers would come and touch her feet. Other people just wanted, madam, aap ko ek chai pila de, please.
I've also taken her autograph.
Yeah.
And her
Taking
autograph
autograph.
said, autograph nahi, आंदोलन से परिवर्तन.
Bilkul.
So yeah.
So, and of course, there was an international dimension. Narmada Bachao Andolan, among other things, put India, in a sense, at the center of the international movement for redefining development. And that is why, for example, much later in 2004, the first time that the World Social Forum was held outside Brazil,
Was here, yeah.
it
It
came to
came to
India. Yeah, you know, the first time that the World Bank ever agreed to have an independent inquiry on its own project was because of Narmada.
Wow.
The first time that the World Bank was compelled as a consequence of that inquiry to withdraw further loans was because of Narmada. So these are the positives. And the downside perhaps was that while we succeeded, I think, I say we with some humility, please don't get me wrong. I was pretty much a bystander, actually, supportive bystander, but still, I'm saying this out of a fraternal sense of identity, not because I did anything for it. That the achievement was that it became a household name कि अरे यार big dam meaning क्या इतना लोग drown हो रहा है तेरे को ठीक लगता है क्या no rehabilitation तो होना चाहिए पर बांध भी बनना चाहिए. This was an improvement. We may not have persuaded enough people to say, all right, no dam if there is no rehabilitation. Few people came to that view, but at least enough people and bureaucrats very frankly used to tell the Andolan activists, hey, you guys are there, that's why these people will get at least something. If the Andolan had not been there, even this much land people would not have got.
Right.
So all those things, and I mean, look, this history will decide. I mean, at the moment, the jury is still out on whether or not it made the establishment rethink big dam as a specific project. But I'm sorry to report that in my assessment, the development model in the way that we were all through various kinds of platforms and forums and networks, where we were trying to say that, look, this particular model of development itself is bankrupt. And the deeper and larger point which Narmada Bachao Andolan was making, which was actually a rather subtle point, is that a paradigm of technology and of development which cannot maximize the benefits of the water in that river without destroying it as a river is doomed to self-destruct. This point we were not able to persuade either policymakers or the public at large. And it's ironic that today, now, I see this, at least on social media, a little bit, I'm seeing some people ask, कि अरे यार जब पानी बॉटल में बिकने लगा था हमने कुछ नहीं कहा तो नेचुरली ये दिन तो आना ही था कि हवा भी हमको जिंदा रहने के लिए हवा भी खरीदनी पड़े बॉटल में. Now people are saying that. So this is the third.
Okay.
The fourth has to be Ram Janam Bhoomi. Actually, more than liberalization, though they go together in some ways. There is a connection, not an obvious one, and not a deliberate or an organizational connection, but the kind of deracination of genuine community which communalism does. See, because what is communalism? Communalism is the construction of a fragile and threatened and always embattled. The whole notion of community is only experienced in relation to that which threatens you.
Yes, yes.
तो वो तो तभी हो सकता है ना कि आपने अगर इंडिविजुअल को पहले छोटा किया. Because and so why was Ram Janma Bhoomi and the let's say actually let's think of a single event, which is the destruction. That's the demolition of the masjid in Ayodhya. So for not just me personally and individually, but I think pretty much for my peer group. Oh, it was easily the most traumatic event, a public event, larger event from somehow maybe we were too small, for the implications of the war to register. I have childhood memories of blackouts, China war, and even the Pakistan war of the mid 60s. I have memories of trenches being dug in the park outside, and we are being trained how to go into the trench if there's an air raid and all that. But somehow, I guess as a child, it doesn't register, what its implications are. And I think honestly, there was just no doubt that this was a temporary thing. Of course, we are going to win. ये कभी doubt में ही नहीं था. Never. Our sense of, I at least in my kind of family, we were brought up to have that kind of confidence in the systems, in the army, in our public servants. So those didn't register. So really, the single most traumatic event is the demolition. I mean, you could say why demolition? Why not the anti-Sikh riots? Oh, that was certainly there too. That too. But I'll tell you why I'm choosing to focus on the demolition. Because the anti-Sikh riots, somehow you could they were in some way a crime of passion. I don't know if do I need to distinguish that even in formal jurisprudence?
I hear you. Yeah.
In formal jurisprudence, it makes a distinction between a cold-blooded, premeditated, planned, and organized crime.
Yeah.
And a crime that is committed in a fit of rage.
Right.
Or in a traumatic moment. Now, of course, the scale of the violence that happened, particularly in Delhi, of course, there was also planning. But the fundamental impetus and why 8 out of 10 people in Delhi in that week, because I was there, I was sent by one magazine to cover the post-assassination events. So there was all of that. It didn't, and sure enough, in 6 months, I saw the change in the mood. The same people who had said, ha, maro sano ko, they pulled back. They expressed remorse. They thought, arey, too much ho gaya. And no, wrong. No, one wrong. 2 wrongs don't make a right. That kind of thing, in 5 to 6 months, it emerged. Okay, people who had stopped getting into an auto rickshaw or a taxi because it was driven by a Sardarji stopped behaving like that. And they went back to their normal friendship and fraternity. But Babri Masjid is exactly the opposite.
Right.
I know that to many people it feels like a crime of passion because it is projected as a necessary, what is the word for it? Sublimating exercise for one set of people who were holding a sense of historical trauma, for them to overcome that trauma by doing this. That is the argument that has been made. But again, I had watched the build up to it. It is, and I was spending a lot of time in the villages of Rajasthan through the late 80s. So on almost a weekly and monthly basis, we saw how the temperature was changing, how the atmosphere was changing, how slogans that were considered very tuch began to gather, a kind of gradual acceptance. I don't want to even, repeat a single one of those slogans here, even for the record. Whoever is interested can do the research and find them. But they were obnoxious and they were openly threatening slogans. Okay. So now, at that time, we knew, I think most of my peers knew, that this was not a one-off thing, and that the rest of our lives would go in grappling with what energy this had, that had emerged. It is an energy. And it was a massive movement in terms of numbers, in terms of passion, in terms of how many different sections of society it managed to persuade to its way of looking at life and history and the future. So, yeah, I think that is, and the fifth.
I had a childhood memory around that. Maybe I'll share that once you're done with your five.
Yeah. No, the fifth, I
Yeah.
want to make the fifth a hopeful one. Again, now these are two actually separate, but they are kind of three actually related things. And they are, so it's not a single event, but I want to club together the right to information, the right to education, and the right to work.
Wow, that's an interesting choice. Yeah.
Okay. Again, why? Because again, the egalitarian aspirations of the society and the polity found not just expression, but they got institutionalized. And it didn't happen it didn't drop from the sky. And it was to all of us proof that at that time, that for all its weaknesses, for all its flaws, this electoral democracy can be made to work. It can provide inch by inch, if you keep at it, it can provide structures
Lovely.
that enable us,
To
to move towards what is the baseline issue? Dignity for all. Because देखो, इंसान भूखा भी रह लेता है. I'm not saying उसको रहना चाहिए, but the core hurt, the core injury of even going hungry is your loss of dignity.
Yeah.
So the core issue in all three is that they were meant to fulfill that dream, which is implicit in we the people. जब हम कहने लगे कि भाई we the people, meaning no distinction, हम सब एक at some basic level हम सब एक हैं, and there can be no compromise in every last person getting the same level of dignity. Now, of course, why have I left out liberalization and globalization, etc.? That is, a big question, you might say. One is because I think it's so obvious that it's, uninteresting. And also, actually, that was a global tsunami. I mean, of course, we had our Indian version, our Indian markers for it.
Sure.
And if you want, later we can talk about what then are the, why is RTE, RTI and Manrega, why Why are they not likely to fulfill quite the promise that we had? That's a
Hmm.
separate. That's a separate. Maybe I should stop here, and
Lovely.
you tell me what your questions are.
Some unorthodox ones there, Rajni, which is interesting. Narmada Bachao and RT, RTI, and so that's interesting. I think.
Because we should. I think we should acknowledge them as very great high points.
Sure, very important. I think what you're saying is so important to
Not
celebrate them.
flawless. I
Sure.
want to emphasize, not flawless.
Hmm. Hmm.
Nothing in real life, nothing is flawless. For every action, you will get a reaction. Okay, for every well-intentioned action, there will be unforeseen क्या कहते हैं साइड इफेक्ट्स. वो अलग बात है. But I at least believe that there are moments in history which stand as significant in and of themselves. That, for example, the day Barack Obama became president of the United States, by some chance, I happened to be there on the day that election result came. So, I was. People watched it live all over the world, right? That famous speech at Grant Park. This is what I felt. I said, it doesn't, at one level, no matter how good or bad a president he actually is, that will be a separate chapter, a separate story. But something has been, there's a high point that has been reached. हम उसको ना भूले. That way.
So lovely. Yeah. That's amazing, Rajni. Thank you so much for these five. And I think anybody who's going to be watching is going to be re-examining what they mean by significant events, because you're actually literally positing that we look at some of these as kind of aspirational. I love the framing that you've done, because you've given an aspirational framing to some of these and said this represents the aspiration we had as a nation. So I think the role of history to remember that ye yahan jana tha. I think that's what is happening to me as you share these, like almost reclaiming the role of history, not as, oh God, ye kya ho gaya, but literally saying these were the milestones and this is where we wanted to head. So thanks for evoking that spirit. I would say that's really well thought out, very, very surprising. Yeah, I was just going to recount that story, because some of these I have kind of encountered in tangential ways. Like I said, with Medha Patkar, it was an autograph, and in Asia Social Forum, because Asia Social Forum came before World Social Forum in 2001 or 2, which for me was like, whoa. But I think so for me, when I was a kid with 92, 93, and around that time the fervor was building up, and we were going somewhere in train, and there were kar sevaks in the train, and they would scream each time a tunnel would come, the whole train would ring, and they had these poha and good, वो खा रहे थे, वो उनका वो खाना था, और लेट रात तक आवाज और पूरा सेलिब्रेशन. एंड माय मम सेड आप आवाज कम कीजिए, तो दे लाइक अरे आप हम जिस पे जा रहे हैं आप नहीं समझ रहे ये वो. एंड माय मॉम सेड कि आप इतने बड़े राम भक्त बन रहे हैं, आप में से किसी एक व्यक्ति को भी हनुमान चालीसा आती है क्या? मेरे बेटे को आती है, सुनाओ. And I was in my seat and I was like, okay, let me just remember it in case I'm asked to narrate it. But they shut up after that, and my mom held that. And there was also this joke that was, I mean, I have people on the right who, did kar seva and all. And there was a brick that came back from there, and somebody koi haath jod raha tha, to koi aur usko bol raha hai ki haath mat jodo, ye masjid ki eat hai types. And that was kind of a joke in the kind of that side of the world and that part of the family. So first hand some of that, and then the vacations after the bomb blast and all that happened. So that was one. But just the shallowness of it, I think the shallowness of what was happening, I think that was one thing that stayed. Quickly, a few others that I wanted to share. When I went to Flora Fountain and then realized that this is Hutatma Chowk and a monument to the 109 people who died when Gujarat Maharashtra was splitting, and then me going back and I'm like, whoa, this is Bal Thakre's rise in Shiv Sena, and like I'm like right now with Uddhav Thakre there, I can like trace all the way back to saying, whoa, this is what happened. And this was not taught to us, at least to me. In my history, there was no emergency, there was no this split of states, no like nothing. So that for me was quite a discovery. Of course, liberalization for me and Mandal Commission later, of course, but liberalization क्योंकि हमारी life एक channel से मेरे आंखों के सामने एक channel से दो channel से छह channel से अब so you kind of internalized that journey. We were conditioned as teenagers very well. मतलब जैसे ही 10 साल के हुए तब 92 मैं आशीष से ही बात कर रहा था अभी recently कोठारी से कि exactly हमारा जो हमारी तालीम हमारी जनरेशन की वो शायद लिबरलाइजेशन की तालीम है. जब 10 साल के हुए तब 92 हुआ. जैसे जैसे बड़े हुए सिस्टमैटिकली कोक पेप्सी ये सब आते आते we became the children of that liberalization. So I would say that for me, Anna Hazare and India Against Corruption seemed quite salient as like nobody thought it would go there. And of course, Corona, we're in the middle of such a tough moment. 62 was also coming to me. Nehru ji ka confidence and India ka confidence pe jo jhatka baitha shayad. That's what's been told to us at that time. So I think some of these, so lovely that there is our history has such rich tapestry. But I want to come to now, Rajni, because I think right now I feel we're in the middle of an event that has serious, like it'll be remembered. It's a churning almost that's happening. We're in the middle of a churning. And I'm like, when you find yourself in middle of history or middle of something that's going to get remembered, what do you do then? So just thought be great to hear, how do you look at right now? This now where we are in the middle of this, and I don't want to talk more so much about the pandemic as much as the frustration with the government, and like just it's almost like ye kahan aa gaye hum yu hi chalte chalte like ye kya ho gaya. Navindu and I were having a constitution conversation and he was almost about to break down because like how did this happen, what happened, how did this moment come where election rallies and Kumbh Melas are going on? Like, how did we get here? So I don't know. And what are lessons? What's next? I don't know. So so just wanted to hear you out on these.
Well, I should firstly, issue a disclaimer that I am as confused as the next person, honestly, So I should start by saying that I have no clear answers in terms of कि ऐसा क्यों हो रहा है और अब क्या होगा.
So I'll clarify my question, Rajni. I think my question is इसको देखने का सही तरीका क्या हो सकता है? What is a historically informed way of looking at it to make sense of it? I think that's what as somebody who's
देखो, in this I will actually take you away from history in one sense. Okay, I'll try to do that by I am currently feeling very critical with this trauma-based view of history or trauma-based view of what I am today. In the sense that I'm not saying there aren't traumas. Sorry. Of course, there are traumas in personal lives and certainly in history. But just as it is problematic to walk into a room and only ask, okay, what are the equations of oppression here? Which is how a lot of what is happened over the last, 70, 80 years. There is a strand of progressive, pro-justice, pro-equity activism, which ends up doing this, whether it intends to or not. Right? You walk into a room and the only thing you want to know is who's oppressing whom. Now, for better or for worse, that is not how reality works. Because of course there are oppressions, but they are not only there. It's not only oppressions. And much of life is made up of very complex and very subtle interrelations. And if we are not interested in understanding the totality of that reality, and we never can, let me not make any, I don't want to give any false. Of course, you can never know the whole of reality. The human brain is not designed to know that, not of this material reality. You can know the absolute reality. You can know the abstract. After all, this is the species that has come up with the most subtle abstract thought. So, given the fact that we can never know it completely, even approximations become impossible if we have prejudged a situation. That is one. I'll give you an example. Okay, maybe not. It will distract us. Let me come to my point. I think I got sidetracked. I want to share again the story of Gandhi being thrown off the train. Okay. This is the famous incident, right? It's also depicted in the Gandhi film. It's a fairly accurate depiction. But what that, of course, it's a film and he has to complete the whole story in like 2.5 hours. So what he doesn't show you in the film is that, and Gandhi goes on to spend the whole night sitting in some small ramshackle room. Okay, it's cold, it's dark, it's an alien place. It's literally somewhere in the middle of nowhere for him, in a strange and foreign country. The incident has all the makings of a lifelong crippling trauma.
Right. Yeah.
If he had taken it only at a personal level, and after all, at the end of the day, that specific affront is to that specific individual. It is that discrete individual who has been physically flung out of the train. So the material details, there is nothing to fight over. It's an open and shut case at one level. कि ये अब जो है अपने कलेजे से लगा के जिंदगी भर जो है रो सकता था. That was one option. Why does this man do exactly the opposite? And if I am now going strictly by what you can see in the autobiography, I don't want to assume anything. So it's really a passage everybody should read. So he talks about, he felt angry, he felt humiliated, he felt pain, he thought I should run back home, all that happens. And then he kind of suddenly turns around and he says, wait a minute, this is not about me. This is about the evil of racism. Why are we tolerating this? The moment he flips it from his personal self to the problem that has actually been demonstrated to him, some magic happens. And that is why this man could go on to fight the battles he fought without bitterness, without a sense of I am victim, you are my oppressor. Right. No, he's saying, in fact, ये तो और एक कदम और आगे चले जाते हैं. He says, actual victim तो तुम हो. तुम पहले खुद को brutalize कर रहे हो, उसके बाद मुझे brutalize कर रहे हो. तुम्हें लगता है कि तुम बॉस हो, तुम्हें लगता है कि तुम राज कर रहे हो, तुम्हारे से बेचारा और है ही नहीं कोई.
Wow, yeah.
स्ट्रॉन्ग तो मैं हूं, जो तुम्हारे वार को सहता हुआ फिर भी सर ऊंचा करके खड़ा हूं तुम्हारे सामने. दबाना है तो दबा लो, मैं मरूंगा पर मैं झुकूंगा नहीं.
Wow.
Where does that come from? It can only come from complete absence of bitterness. Okay, so that even an utterly and completely heinous crime like Jallianwala Bagh does not shake this man from his commitment to action that is not based on bitterness.
Wow.
And I think maybe the most important, now come back to everyday life, because वो तो असल तुम्हारा real question तो ये था ना कि भाई what do we do in everyday life?
उसके पहले just one thing I want to share, Rajni. This story is so important, I'm realizing, and it's gonna get more and more precious with coming generations.
Yeah,
Because what you're saying is my trauma doesn't define me. And I think
exactly.
that is such an important generational learning to pass on, because
Yes.
around me, like when I look at the next generation, just the level of sensitivity and trauma and just there's so much of that is increasing. And I think this is such an important story. So thanks
Yeah.
for that. Thank you for
Yeah.
that story.
And by the way, please note that this is not some rarefied knowledge or wisdom in some corner. If you watch that movie series, Kung Fu Panda,
Hmm, hmm,
I
hmm.
strongly recommend the
Yes,
second movie.
yes,
There
yes.
is a moment where the villain, who is in the shape of a peacock,
Shen. Hmm.
turns to Po. What is his name? Our hero's name
Po,
is
po,
Po,
po.
nah. And he says, but how can you have
How
this
did you?
power?
Yeah, yeah.
I destroyed your life. I killed your mother. I separated you from your parents. You're still wandering around lost, not having any clue who you are. And he says, yeah, but why should that define who I am?
Yeah,
So this idea is hardly rare, or
yeah, yeah,
or even in any way inaccessible.
yeah, yeah,
Um, I think the main point is, okay, no matter what the valid justification might be for having a sense of becharapan,
Hmm.
acting from it doesn't lead to creativity. And this is where one very important thing that has got left out so far in this conversation, because this point cannot be completed without bringing in Baba Sahib Ambedkar.
Hmm.
His central preoccupation is with what will make the good society. Justice for Dalits is one part of that. Because if you're only going to seek justice for any one section of society, whether it is oppressed Dalits or hurt Hindus or whoever, you will never get a good society. But if you focus on what will it take to make a good society, you won't get immediate results. There'll be many 2 steps forwards, 1 step backward, all that will happen. But at least there is a hope that eventually you will get there, or at least get close to it. That is why anybody who is trying to settle scores through public life, through politics, is dangerous.
Hmm. Hmm. Wow.
Anyone. And I mean that quite, if it sounds harsh, then I apologize to anyone who is hurt. But this is a clinical truth.
Yeah, I'm also internalizing this, Rajni, as a message to all of us who are listening in, that in our pursuit for social change, is it really a pursuit for a good society for everyone, or is it a processing of a certain hurt or a certain bias? Because we don't know when that line, that it's really a thin line between what am I really doing. Like I think so that yeah, I'm listening it
Yeah,
from
yeah.
local
Though,
level also.
we are often doing all of this together,
Hmm, hmm.
unconsciously.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because, this is not in any way to minimize the importance of healing and making whole the hurt individual. I am not in any way minimizing the significance of doing that. But as in the case of other people, see, Forget politics, forget history. In your everyday life, in the family, in your relationships, how do you deal with what bothers you in the other person? What troubles you about the other person? What you think are their flaws.
Mm-hmm.
The only way you can do it is to remove your attention from their flaws and instead focus it on what makes them special. What are their good qualities? And it is when we get engaged in loving them through helping to improve and further expand their good qualities,
Mm-hmm.
that actually maybe over a period of time their flaws get, either our perception of the flaw changes, very often that is the case, or that person grows and their whatever it is that was very troubling, disturbing, bothered you might change.
This is making me realize that this is a whole separate podcast in itself, Rajni, and I'll tell you why I feel so. Because I think what you're proposing is almost, I mean, in one way, it's very simple. It's about being appreciative, positive, and so on. But I think to me, the way I'm hearing it is it goes much deeper because I think my generation and the next generation have a very strong internalized inner critic, and somehow that critical dialogue has been internalized so much that there is a lot of self torment, and then there is outer judgment and social media. We can go all into it, and I think what I'm hearing you propose is almost a different way of engaging with that hurt, that trauma, internally and externally, from not a bichara lens, because it just seems that the bichara card is getting played so much that by the time we reach Gen Z, everybody is bichara because everybody has a needs a trigger warning and a trauma alert, and I think what you're proposing is quite important and profound. I think it's almost an antidote to some of the stuff that I just see going out of hand. Like I feel like at millennials, everybody had a childhood trauma or a childhood event, and I was like, is there a perfect childhood? Because everybody has had something in childhood. But now with Gen Z, I'm like, this has gone one more step further because everybody has a mental health issue and everybody makes demands of others saying, do not say this, this triggers me. And suddenly we are in a world of such political correctness and such sensitivity. Oh my God. And the pursuit of truth is getting compromised. I think that's what I'm seeing. Like one is pursuit of truth at a information ecology level, but at an individual level between two people. And I think so that's where I'm hearing this, because what you're saying is vicharepan se mat engage karo, engage with the strength to strength engagement. I think that's so important.
Yeah, though whether it can be done just by saying it, I don't know. I mean, I think I understand
It's a
that
practice, I think. Yeah, right.
it
Like,
can be cultivated, but let us also take stock of how much the flow of time and technology is against this segment of people. I think there is certain toll that is being taken, because of just the speed of life. And I'll tell you, let me give you a bit of a context in this. My mother's the youngest in her family. So my masis were like 10, 14, 15 years older than her. So I got to know them. They were like really a different generation from my parents. Now, these are all people who lived through partition. I mean, in one or two families, they were left with just the clothes on their back. One Masi lost her husband in partition. Actually, it was not a communal death. He was killed by a business partner. But whatever it is, she found herself a widow at the age of 31 or 32 or something. And I saw in these people a kind of solidity, a kind of, like I used to, I didn't have like deep philosophical whatever. It's not like I had deep discussions with them, but just being around them, watching them deal with different situations of life and everything, I used to get the feeling कि my gosh, अगर ये ऊपर इतनी दिखती हैं तो ये नीचे इससे 3 गुना है. These are people with very deep foundations. And I am really wondering how much of that kind of person is any more possible because of the speed of life, because of the whole, the social, cultural, psychic air is polluted. It is polluted by this, what I call the poison of achievement. And achievement being equated with, visibility.
Yes.
And not ke bhai, I can make the most delicious gulab jamuns and my loved ones and I will eat them, and that is it's a beautiful achievement. But किसी ने देखा ही नहीं.
Absolutely.
है ना? तो इसका I really don't know, Abhishek, how much of this the individual, can counter. I maybe now, my generation may be the last set of people who grew up without television, without the digital. I mean, look, the digital revolution happens when I'm like 40. In any big way. I'm not saying that the small, what was it, that game where the dot used to go across the screen? Okay, that was there in mid-80s. But phir bhi, in any big way, that's why I'm a digital Neanderthal. But to people, and now, God forbid, to be a baby just now, I really have no idea what is going to happen. It may not be all bad. I really want to be very agnostic about it. But because जो young parents हैं वो खुद नहीं छोड़ पाते, तो 6 महीने का बेबी भी जो है वो phone fascinated हो जाता है. And the human brain was not wired for that kind of rapid action stimulation.
Yeah.
That is a very big issue. Our brains were designed for, see, even just now, at the moment, what is happening? Your eyes are blinking. That's it. Maybe you nod. It's not a tuck, 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 change of images, which is what happens when we watch anything in the audiovisual realm. Even in real life, bhai, if I look out of the window, okay, the leaves on the tree are moving. There's a bird that just flew from one window to the other. But other than that, it's not a bombardment of my cognitive machinery. Now, that bombardment is definitely leading to some kind of overload. We don't realize it. Even if it is the most innocent kind of, I have watched maybe 7 videos since morning, even if they are 1 minute ones. So I really don't know how. Maybe now new experts will maybe suggest new therapies or new forms of क्या कहते हैं, व्रत, digital व्रत.
Yeah, sure.
Maybe that is what. But फिर भी देखो, that is only one small part of it, na? The digital bombardment. There is still the larger issue of who am I? उसके लिए space चाहिए भाई.
बिल्कुल.
Breathing space चाहिए, thinking space चाहिए, and that cannot happen if we are everything around us is saying you're a nobody.
Yeah.
Or is saying that life is divided between heroes and zeros.
I'm going to, again, like I'm saying, this is a whole podcast in itself, but I'm tempted to respond and like push back a bit on this because,
please.
Like I see you doing Ahimsa conversations, right? And you came in at 14. You're using Zoom to do like 50, 60 Ahimsa conversations. It's a documentation of unprecedented level, I feel, of Ahimsa in this way. It hasn't happened before. And it wasn't even possible before, because who would travel so far and
बिल्कुल
wide?
बिल्कुल.
तो आपने टेक को अडेप्ट कर लिया. या मैं अपने आप को देखता हूँ, तो हमारी जो जनरेशन थी, जहाँ पहले पहले स्काइप आने लगा और वॉइस होने लगी, we organized ourselves around the Rio Climate Change Summit. We made friends around the world. We traveled. We organized without a central support. South Asian Youth Conference, no government support, no donor support. We just communicating using internet so using the internet to create the vision, because the origins of internet were also dreamers who dreamt
Yes.
of something. And so that spirit, I think every generation will have to tap into that spirit, I feel,
Yes.
to use technology to further the emancipation or further this project, right? The project humanity, so to speak.
भाई अब इसमें यह है कि maybe at one level this is a very old dilemma. At one level, if you go by what Jared Diamond says, the guy who's written Guns, Germs and Steel and The Third Chimpanzee and books like that, उसकी research कहती है कि settled agriculture took more than 2,500 years to go from Mesopotamia to what is now Great Britain.
Wow.
Okay, it moved about a few kilometers every 100, 200 years. Spread matlab. Now, he's saying that's not only because that was such a great distance or anything. Actually, if you look on the map, it's not such a great distance, even for a walking culture. He's saying it's because people realized from the beginning that it's a double-edged sword.
Oh, really? Wow.
Of course. Pretty much every disease known to mankind is related to our domestication of animals.
Right.
And the whole dynamic of life changed, I mean, unimaginably. Of course, it happened very gradually. The whole problem of population explosion begins with settled agriculture.
Right.
Now, this will be seen as a very terrible thing to say, because having more and more and more people at any point of time on earth is deemed to be, a great progress till we reach this point where we know that you cannot have 9 billion people on the planet and hope to have growth in its current model or current definition. तो मैं ये कह रही हूँ कि basically these are very old dilemmas. The problem is that I think in earlier times, time was slower.
Yes. I hear you. I totally hear you. It took much longer for lesser things to happen. And now a lot happens.
And therefore, the whole, there was so much more that could happen simultaneously. And of course, there were spaces to drop out. That's why hunters and gatherers remained till the 20th century. It's not some kind of, it's not an ignorance. They've always known, यार, ऐसा कौन सा hunter gatherer है जिसको पता नहीं है कि दूसरे किस्म के लोग हैं.
Right, but it's a
Why
choice.
did they remain?
They opted out of the,
वो तो I think it's, again, I'm not sure if it's Diamond or someone else, they have calculated that the hunter-gatherer has much more leisure.
Absolutely,
than the settled farmer. Now, here is a very important fork in the road. One view of the human species is that, to be human is to want more.
Right.
To be human is to want to do the different, to stretch the boundary. Yes, that is clearly true. Right? But I am not sure that the natural curiosity of our species is the same as the frontiermanship that has given us this modern technology. तुमने Star Trek देखा हुआ है ना?
बहुत बचपन में थोड़ा सा. Captain Spock.
Captain Kirk and Mr. Spock.
Mr. Spock. Huh.
What are the opening lines of Star Trek? Space, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the Starship Enterprise. वगैरह वगैरह. तो ये जो frontiermanship है ना, that is very American.
Right. Yeah. That's another podcast in itself, I think.
But now it's a global phenomenon.
Yes.
Now it's not limited to America.
With very less opportunity to opt out of it. Like you're saying, there were spaces now. That space to opt out is shrinking.
Shrinking. Sure. I am now beginning to wonder if it's, I mean, you would have to really, I don't know, do what to create the space for yourself.
To opt out. Yeah.
But I think, देखो, individual के लिए बहुत कुछ करने को है, ऐसा नहीं है. We should all read about Richard Stallman, who gave the world the free software movement. Right?
बिल्कुल.
किया ना उसने?
बिल्कुल. मौके आएंगे. हाँ.
We should all look more closely at the life of people like Medha Patkar.
Right.
And I don't, I mean, all those people who defy the dominant logic creatively.
I like that. Creatively defy dominant logic. That's a good one. Yeah.
Rather than just doing hi, jala do, ye mehlon ki duniya. ठीक है, वो भी, that's a very honorable sentiment. And, it also must be respected. But after you have jalado the mehlon ki duniya, then what?
Right.
ये तो आपने करके देख लिया ना 20th century में, कितनी बार करके देख लिया. That out of the ashes of those जले हुए महल,
even more
not necessary कि तुम्हारे पसंद का बागीचा खड़ा होगा. बिल्कुल. So there is very severe limitation, though it's a very emotionally appealing and in some ways a visceral response. By the way, you know where that comes from, right?
Which one? Appealing response?
Vyasa. It's a line from a song in Vyasa.
Okay.
Compulsory viewing. Everybody who
आपके
has
साथ films का, I think एक film
just
और
now after this go online and find the song.
प्यासा. अच्छा.
ये महलों, ये तख्तों, ये ताजों की दुनिया. These are the opening lines. You will find it in Sahir. If you go looking for collection of Sahir songs, you will find it.
Lovely.
So this is always going to be there. But the people who defy the dominant paradigm and yet make a dent. देखो defiant बड़े होते हैं. Dent कौन करेगा? Wendell Berry, another very important name. It might be worthwhile for you to do a session, maybe just doing selected readings from Wendell Berry.
Okay.
तो ये कैसे होगा? That maybe the nutshell of it is that it's a saying. I don't know who has said this. It's a famous quotation that you don't change things by just destroying the old. You change them by building the next thing. By creating the new game.
The new game. I like that.
Yeah. आजकल की भाषा में, आजकल की
Yes, it rings.
Yeah. So, उसके लिए आपको पहली बात तो यह है कि हौसले बुलंद रखने पड़ते हैं.
बिल्कुल.
ये भी तो एक किस्म की डिफायंस है ना कि नहीं होंगे हम डिप्रेस कर लो क्या?
बिल्कुल. Absolutely. That's a
तुम कर लो कोशिश हमको डिप्रेस करने.
Yeah. And operating from strength, I think I heard that also from you, operating from appreciation, operating from strength, not letting events define us. I think some of that is also forms of resistance, right?
Yes, it is. Because, I'm sorry to be so banal, and I don't know if this is an appropriate dialogue to quote from Bollywood, but it is true. Jo dar gaya, wo mar gaya. No, now this can also go wrong because some people, by the way, I am a big darpoke, let me tell you that. So I am a very fearful person. So let me not give any wrong impression here. But all one tries to do is to, be a bit self-conscious of it. And then you keep repeating, I keep repeating like a mantra. The only thing to fear is fear itself. The only thing to fear is fear itself. Kuch to asar hota hai yaar. कुछ
Hmm.
तो उसका इसके ingrams, it leaves some traces. You keep
Hmm.
reminding yourself of that.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Great, Rajni. I think just to honor time, and this sounds like a series of conversations. I guess we should do a conversations with Rajni, because I think Bollywood and that itself is such a rich conversation. The American dream and how that is coming in is a
Yeah.
conversation. Intergenerationality and reflecting on that. I mean, there are so many rich threads, and of course, we didn't segue back into these historical events to see links. So I'm seeing a lot of conversations here. But
Yeah.
this has been really good, Rajni. Thank you so much. And there's so much
No
here
pleasure.
in
But
this
doesn't Kajal
conversation.
want to say anything? She's there, I think, still.
So I'm going to pause this recording for now, and then maybe
Huh.
we can, or let it stay on actually. Why
Yeah,
why
you can
not?
cut it
Why
later.
bilkul,
Huh?
bilkul. So yeah,
Yeah.
let's hear
We
Kejal
have
and
about
maybe check
seven, eight
out.
minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, we can hear Kejal and we can check out from there then. Kejal, you
Yeah,
can
yeah.
turn on your camera also.
I was here only to listen and be a
Yeah,
voyeur.
let me see. Thank you for your hearts. I was getting your heart messages, and I didn't want to spoil the camera effect. Otherwise, I wanted to do in return.
Yeah, uh, I love listening to Rajni. I think because every time you bring out history, there's so much other things that come up with that part of history. And I think the way we look at history, and I've been always a fan of history, and most people around me say like, history is so boring, and why do you have to go back to past and da 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 da. Da. But I think definitely from your conversations of how you frame and how you make sense of history is alive for me, and also the way the incidents add on to each other, and hence what is formed. And it is very again uh, influence of the times or whatever, that we look at successes in history, but we forget that it's actually like a gradual journey which is building on to something. And that perspective in itself, just to look at things from that perspective, is something which is not available to most of us, and hence the way we look at it is very narrowly.
I think it's political, in fact, Rajni.
Yeah,
You're
it is.
giving a different politics. You're saying look, strength, and frame history that way, which is very powerful. Which I think your choice of events is literally drawing a line of hope, and not an intellectual dissection of what's going on, but really literally a line of hope. And
Yeah.
combined, sorry, I came in Kejal, but I couldn't stop.
No, no, no.
Combined with what you're saying, कि आप बेचारे मत बनो, and I think it's almost a worldview that you're sharing, looking at history as strengths, dipping into not being bichara, using Baba Saheb and Gandhi as references. And I think there's something quite powerful there that we touched. So thanks for that.